Chapter 1. When love started to sound like a warning. He said I'd regret letting him go, but the only thing I regret is not leaving sooner. The night he humiliated me in front of his colleagues was the night I learned what control disguised as love really looks like. I was the loyal wife who gave up everything for his dream, until I found out he'd used my name to forge $1 million loan. He thought I'd stay quiet. He didn't know silence can be the loudest revenge. My name is Elena Moore, and this is the story of how I proved him wrong. I met Ryan Carter at a biotech conference in Austin back in 2014. I was 26, ambitious, and convinced that hard work could fix almost anything. He was 30, the kind of man who filled a room without trying sharp in both suits and words, with the confidence of someone who believed success was a natural state of being. We talked over burnt coffee and cold sandwiches after a panel, and he told me he liked the way I argued. I told him I liked that he didn't interrupt. 2 months later, he was calling me every night. 6 months later, we were married. For the first few years, everything felt effortless. We built a rhythm that looked like partnership. I handled long hours at BioNext Therapeutics, a mid-size pharmaceutical company in Seattle, while he launched his health tech startup out of a shared office in Austin. We split our time between the two cities, chasing opportunity and each other. When our daughter Sophie was born in 2015, he held her with awe and said he'd never been prouder of anything. I believed him. Ryan admired my drive in the beginning. He used to tell friends that I was the kind of woman who could walk into any boardroom and come out with a deal. I wore those words like armor. But somewhere around 2018, when I was promoted to marketing director, admiration turned into unease. He began asking questions that sounded like compliments with barbs hidden underneath. "You really think it's healthy to travel that much?" he'd ask while scrolling through his phone. "I'm just afraid you'll burn out." Or, "You're amazing at work, but I miss the woman who used to laugh more." I told myself it was love disguised as worry, that every marriage shifted with time. At first, I tried to prove I could do both. I came home earlier, cooked dinners, even when I was exhausted, forced smiles when he came back from business trips full of stories about investors and markets. But the balance never returned. His company grew, and so did his ego. He started talking about sacrifices, about how successful people needed partners who understood their vision. I wanted to be supportive, but every conversation began to feel like a negotiation I couldn't win. The night that changed everything started like most others, a Friday heavy with deadlines. I had just wrapped a late client presentation when Ryan called, his voice tight. "You're still at the office?" he asked. "The party started an hour ago. It's your company, not mine," I said, grabbing my bag. "I'll be there soon." By the time I arrived at the downtown hotel, the ballroom was glowing with warm light and laughter. Ryan stood near the stage, glass in hand, surrounded by people I didn't know. When he saw me, his smile flickered, then returned with something performative in it. "There she is," he said loudly, drawing attention. "Our very own future CEO." The crowd laughed politely. Someone near the bar whispered something I couldn't catch, but the tone made my stomach twist. He kept talking, making jokes that landed like small bruises, about how I worked more than he did, about how he barely saw his wife except on conference calls. It was supposed to sound charming, but the laughter felt sharp. I smiled on cue, cheeks burning, wishing the floor would open. When the speeches ended, he leaned close and kissed my cheek for the crowd, his breath smelling of whiskey. "You made it," he murmured. "I always make it," I said quietly. Later that night, I found myself standing alone on the balcony outside the ballroom, cold air brushing my skin. I could still hear music inside, muffled by glass. Behind me, a couple of his colleagues were talking. One of them said, "She must be exhausting at home." The other laughed. I felt something inside me tighten, a small thread, snapping where pride used to be. Ryan found me there a few minutes later, smiling as if nothing had happened. "You were amazing tonight," he said. "Everyone loves you." I looked at him and wondered if he actually believed that. When we got home, I went straight to the kitchen, poured water, and tried to steady my breath. He followed, loosened his tie, and leaned against the counter. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm tired, Ryan." He nodded, watching me. Then he said it almost gently. "If you ever walk away from this, from us, you'll regret it." I turned to him, unsure if it was a threat or an attempt at comfort. I wanted to ask what he meant, but couldn't find the words. Instead, I said nothing. He kissed my forehead, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen long after he was gone, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the window. The city stretched outside, indifferent and alive. Somewhere out there, people were falling in love, promising forever. I stood there realizing that my forever might have already expired. When I finally went upstairs, he was asleep, breathing evenly, his arm draped over my side like ownership. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the first time I'd mistaken control for care. In the silence, his voice echoed in my head, calm and certain. If you ever walk away, you'll regret it. I didn't know then that it wasn't a promise, it was a warning. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 2. The Cost of Staying Too Long. I started waking before dawn in 2020, long before the house stirred, long before Sophie's alarm buzzed, and the neighborhood buses sighed at the corner. The city felt like it was holding its breath. I would sit at the kitchen table with my laptop open, a mug cooling beside a stack of project briefs and a calendar no longer divided by flights and hotel confirmations but by video calls and shifting deadlines. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that distance was a strategy, not a symptom. Ryan stayed in Austin for weeks at a time for funding, he said, for meetings for a round that would put his company on the map. He called late and left early. When I reached him in the afternoon, he was always stepping into something important. When he reached me at night, I was always in the middle of dishes or bath time or another slide deck due at 9 the next morning. Our conversations shrank into placeholders. Still here, still busy. Talk tomorrow. BioNex moved marketing fully remote, and I ran the team from our dining room. I set up a ring light, a folding screen, and a ritual. Sophie would color at the end of the table while I led stand-ups, and we would pause when my boss needed a number that only lived in an old spreadsheet tucked somewhere in my brain. I learned to mute while I microwaved oatmeal and to unmute without sounding winded. I learned to smile when I presented and to breathe when the screen went dark. Eventually, the quiet felt normal, then familiar, then almost safe. On a Wednesday that looked like all the others, Olivia called me between sessions. She had been my friend since college and my unofficial lifeline since the night on the balcony. I let the phone ring twice and answered with my forehead pressed to the cool cabinet door. "You sound like you are holding your breath again," she said. "I am fine," I said. "Just tired." She waited. She knew how to make silence feel like a room you had to walk through. "I do not want to break the family," I said. "I do not want to be the one who gives up and runs. He is under pressure. His investors are demanding. He needs time." "You are afraid of leaving because you believe you made him," she said gently. "And you think that if you leave, you will unmake him." I set my head on my folded arms and stared at the wood grain. "And now he makes me believe I break him," I whispered. "There it is," she said. "The trick is that neither is true. You did not make him. You cannot break him. You can only choose you." I wanted to argue to defend the love that still glowed in old photographs, but the words thinned out and fell. I thanked her, promised I would eat something, and opened my inbox instead. It was easier to solve what I could count. That afternoon, a thread caught my eye. It was a small investor chain. 10 people copied. Ryan CC'd, casual in tone, but formal in effect. 2 quick back and forths, a follow-up with an attached term sheet, a polite confirmation of receipt. Near the bottom, a line that looked like a formality acknowledging a potential conflict and a waiver. The line held my name and a digital signature block that matched the one I used for vendor agreements at BioNex. The timestamp pinged a moment when I had been on a video call about regional budgets with my team. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest. Then I took a screenshot. Then I downloaded the thread. Then I moved everything to a folder named for a date and a word I could not mistake. That night, I told myself it was an accident. He must have used a template I shared, maybe forwarded the wrong thing, maybe assumed. I gave the assumption a soft landing and put Sophie to bed. Work was a different kind of quiet storm. Carla had joined my team 3 years earlier with good instincts and a gift for reading rooms. We had become friendly in the lazy way of people who survive product launches together. Coffee jokes, "I owe you one, next time dinner is on me." In late summer, I had begun drafting a long horizon repositioning we were calling BioNex Horizon, a cross-channel strategy built around patient education and regional hospital partnerships. I wrote through lunches and weekends, kept the deck in a folder with my initials and the month. It was not ready. It was a skeleton, a map only I could read. 2 weeks later, Eleanor scheduled an executive review. I logged on and felt my heart pulse in my ears when the title slide filled the screen. BioNex Horizon, presented by Carla Rivers. The first 3 slides were mine almost verbatim. The rest was fleshed with her voice, her color choices, her certainty. I watched Eleanor nod, watched the CFO scribble a note, listened as Carla explained how the strategy would lift physician referrals without raising costs. I kept my face still. When Eleanor said brilliant work, I turned off my camera and stared at my hands until the meeting ended. After the call, I walked to my office nook and opened the audit trail. Our system kept access logs for every deck. I saw my last edit time, then 2 nights later, a login from Carla's laptop using my credentials for 5 minutes. Then another login from a different floor. Then a download. Then a second version saved under a new name. I felt the first spike of anger I had let myself feel in months. It did not solve anything. It did not tell me why. It did tell me to save everything. I exported the logs, printed to PDF, dated the file name, and emailed the package to my personal account. Then I closed my laptop and sat on the rug beside the couch, because the couch felt too forgiving. The next morning, Carla dropped by my video room before the day started. She smiled like always. Big day, she said the pitch went well. Eleanor loved it. I watched her carefully. It did, I said. Nice work, she tilted her head. I hope you are not upset I pulled it forward. We needed momentum and you have been so slammed. You gave it a voice, I said. That was useful. I waited to feel the snap the moment I would confront her, force the truth into the room. It did not come. Instead, I felt a heavy clarity settle in my chest. I did not need a scene. I needed a record. For a while, the days blurred. I was still running the team, still putting out fires, still doing bedtime stories and laundry at midnight, still watching my reflection age in the days between hair appointments I never booked. I tried to reach Ryan on a Tuesday evening to ask about Sophie's parent-teacher conference. He answered from a lively room. I will call you back, he said, and hung up. He did not call back. On a Friday at the end of September, Eleanor asked me to talk through a timeline for Horizon's pilot. We were 2 minutes in when she paused. You look pale, she said. Are you sleeping? Enough, I said with a small smile, then shifted back into dates and deliverables. I did not want to show her the bruise under the plan. That night, Ryan finally called as I stacked plates beside the sink. His voice was relaxed, the sound he used when he believed he was winning. How was your week, he asked. Busy, I said. We moved a major campaign forward, lots of late nights. He laughed a little sharp. Do not bring your office drama home. That is unattractive. I put the dishcloth down and stared at the faucet. He kept talking something about an investor dinner, a lead he could not afford to lose. I said I had to go and ended the call. The kitchen fell silent. It was not the kind of silence that holds space for thought. It was the kind that makes your own breathing sound like a mistake. Later, I sat on the floor beside Sophie's bed while she slept, the nightlight pooling soft gold on her cheek. I traced the curve of her small hand with my eyes and tried to catalog what I could teach her about love. Partnership is not a contest. Respect does not come with disclaimers. Your success is not a threat to anyone who truly loves you. I stayed there until my legs numbed. Then I stood and walked back to the kitchen and turned off the last light. In October, Olivia suggested we add structure to our talks. She invited me to her office on a day when the leaves along the avenue had turned the color of caution. I sat on her sofa and held a paper cup that warmed my fingers. Tell me your litmus test, she said. The simple question that clarifies everything. I thought for a long minute. Does this make me smaller? I said finally. She nodded. Good. Now ask it everywhere. At home, at work, in the mirror. I went home and put a sticky note inside my planner. Ask if this makes you smaller. I did not need to look at it to remember. The question began to show up on its own. In November, Carla pinged me to set up a handoff for Horizon's pilot. She sounded bright, eager, like a runner who had found the pace she loved. We reviewed budgets and vendor lists. She suggested cutting the patient education line in favor of a larger paid social spend. We cannot cut that, I said. It is the backbone. We promised our hospital partners an educational series. It is not optional. She shrugged. Eleanor will want ROI speed. We can add education later. I kept my tone even. Not on this. Keep the education intact. Rebalance elsewhere. She smiled, cool as glass. If that is your call. Later, I wrote Eleanor a brief summary of our decision trail and copied the hospital lead. I did not mention what Carla had tried to shift. I did not mention that my stomach had started to knot before every call with her. I only logged what mattered. I went back to the audit trail and checked permission settings on my folders. I changed passwords. I saved again. December arrived with its false promise of pause. Ryan sent Sophie a photo of a Christmas tree in a lobby with a caption about missing her. He did not ask when he could see her. I asked him for his January travel dates. He replied 3 days later with a line about everything being in flux. I wrote back with the teacher's schedule and rehearsal times, and a small polite reminder that children do not adjust to flux like adults do. He never answered that message. On New Year's Day, the neighborhood set off fireworks in the early evening. Sophie pressed her hands to the window and counted the bursts. I held my phone and scrolled through photos from the year, and stopped at one where I was smiling at something off-camera, shoulders squared, eyes clear. I barely recognized myself. I closed the album and made a quiet list of repairs. In January, our team met for the first in-person day since the year before. Masks off relief, obvious edges of grief tucked into jokes. Eleanor kept the agenda tight and the tone kind. We ate lunch in the conference room, and for a half hour I felt the old joy of building something shoulder to shoulder. When I returned to my desk, I saw a new calendar invite for a board check-in on Horizon. Carla had already accepted and attached a revised deck. I opened it and scanned slide 14, then 23, then the budget appendix. The education line was reduced by half, and the language softened so that a cut sounded like a refinement. I took a breath and wrote a note with timestamps, previous approvals, and the names of partners affected. I sent the note to Eleanor and asked to discuss. I did not accuse. I did not speculate. I pointed. Eleanor called me 20 minutes later. "Keep the education spend intact," she said. "Thank you for flagging. And Elena, take the afternoon. You look like you have been carrying 3 jobs with no breaks." I wanted to laugh, but it would have turned into something else. I thanked her and closed my laptop. I walked home in a thin rain, let the drops blur the block ahead, and counted the steps like beads until the door opened. That night, Ryan called again. The kitchen clock clicked behind me while he talked about money, in a voice he reserved for convincing people he was inevitable. He asked about a document I had never seen, said something about a small waiver, said it would take 2 minutes and mean everything. I stared at the dark window and saw my reflection floating against the glass. "Send me what you need me to read," I said. "I will forward it to our family attorney to review before I sign anything." He exhaled as if I had knocked a glass from his hand. "Elena," he said with that soft edge, "do not make this dramatic. I need you to be easy about this." "I need to be careful," I said. "It is not the same thing." He went quiet. Then he said he had to go. Then the line clicked dead. I stood very still and let the last of the light drain from the room. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the block, a car door closed. I walked to the hall closet and pulled down the file box where I kept birth certificates and warranties and receipts from more hopeful years. I added a folder labeled with the day's date and slid the printed emails inside. I placed the box back on the shelf and pressed my palm to the cardboard, like a seal. When Sophie fell asleep, I lay on the carpet beside her bed again, watched the nightlight paint a small moon on the ceiling, and measured the shape of quiet. There was the quiet of comfort, full of shared air and easy breath. And there was this quiet, a coldness that settled on your shoulders and told you to speak less, take up less room, want less than you wanted yesterday. I had been calling that quiet strength. I had been calling it maturity. Olivia's voice returned to me like a bell. "Ask if this makes you smaller." The answer rose before the question finished. I got up, walked to my desk, and wrote the words on a fresh page so large I could not ignore them in the morning. I looked around the room that had become my office and my refuge and my excuse. I thought of Ryan's laugh and Carla's smile and my own heart steadying despite them both. I told myself that staying meant loyalty and grit and family. I did not see that staying had become fear dressed in noble clothes. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 3. When Betrayal Started to Feel Familiar. By February 2022, Ryan had packed up what was left of his Seattle wardrobe and said he would be gone only a few months. He kissed Sophie goodbye, promised her a trip to Austin when school ended, and drove off before breakfast. I stood in the doorway holding a mug that had already gone cold. When the car disappeared, the silence in the house was not new, just deeper. For the first few weeks, I kept believing him. He called every few days, cheerful, full of plans. He said his company was on the verge of a breakthrough, that investors were circling, that Austin was full of energy he had missed. When I asked about coming home, he always said the same thing. Just a few more weeks, Lena. I need to close this deal first. Do you want us to visit? Not yet, it's too hectic. I'll come back soon, I promise. By spring, the promises lost their shape. He stopped saying soon. He stopped asking about Sophie's piano lessons or the spelling bee she had qualified for. His calls came later at night, sometimes from noisy places, and sometimes not at all. When people from his company stopped copying me on emails, I didn't ask why. I knew. There were whispers among mutual friends about a young investor who traveled with him. I chose not to hear them. At BioNex, work was my structure. The Horizon campaign had survived its rough birth and was ready to launch. Then in March, Eleanor asked to see me. She was standing by the window when I walked in, her expression careful. "There's been a situation," she said. "Some internal materials from Horizon were leaked outside the company. Compliance flagged them. The access came from your credentials." My stomach went tight. "That's not possible," I said. "They'll need to run a review. Until it's cleared, you're suspended with pay." The words blurred. Suspended. With pay. I nodded automatically. "Do what you have to," I said. When I stepped out of her office, Carla was leaning against the wall, pretending to scroll her phone. She looked up and offered a sympathetic smile. "Rough day." "Something like that," I said, walking past her. The investigation meeting was scheduled for the following week. They called it a fact-finding session. HR, legal, and Eleanor were there. The air smelled of coffee and tension. Eleanor opened with the formalities. "This is not a disciplinary hearing. We're simply reviewing data." They projected screenshots on the monitor, my username, download timestamps, a folder containing draft budgets and client pricing models. I watched in silence. "These files were copied to an external drive using your account," legal said. I asked to see the log details. They hesitated, but handed me the printed page. I scanned the IP addresses, the login times, the machine IDs. I recognized one. It belonged to Carla's laptop. She had borrowed my badge for a meeting the week before when hers stopped working. I looked up. "The login was from Carla's device," I said quietly. "I can show you the records from IT. My own machine was offline that afternoon." The room went still. HR whispered something to legal. Eleanor's eyes met mine. "You're certain?" "I checked the audit trail when I saw the alert," I said. "I didn't want to accuse anyone until I was sure." Eleanor turned to legal. "Pull the system records, now." 10 minutes later, they confirmed it. "Carla's accessed my credentials same day, same files." Eleanor closed her notebook. "Thank you, Elena. We'll take it from here." As I left the room, I passed Carla in the hall, her face pale and defensive. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I didn't say a word. That night, while I was cooking pasta for Sophie, my phone rang. Ryan's name filled the screen. I considered ignoring it, but answered anyway. "Hey," he said, his voice bright, casual. "I need your help with some investor forms. Just routine stuff. Can you sign them and send back tonight?" "What kind of forms?" "Just disclosure statements. Nothing heavy. I'm on a deadline." "Email them," I said. "I'll look when I finish dinner." "You don't have to read them," he laughed. "It's boilerplate. Just sign and send." "I'll read them," I said. He sighed. "You used to trust me." "I still do," I said. "I just trust the law, too." After we hung up, I forwarded the attachments to Marcus Shaw, the attorney who had helped finalize my promotion contract. He was thorough and quiet, the kind of man who liked evidence more than adjectives. Within an hour, he called back. "Elena," he said carefully, "these aren't routine. They're loan guarantee documents. Your signature appears on earlier pages, the ones that already closed the deal." "I've never seen them before," I said. "I believe you. The Texas State Securities Board will too. This fits a pattern we see with forged guarantor statements. I'll prepare a file." The room tilted slightly around me. I thanked him and hung up. I checked the documents again, tracing the smooth digital curve of my name. It matched perfectly. I could almost hear Ryan saying it was just a shortcut, just business, just this once. For a long time, I sat at the kitchen table listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and Sophie's voice from upstairs singing along to something on her tablet. Betrayal no longer shocked me. It felt procedural, expected, like an annual event you marked on the calendar but never celebrated. I opened a new folder on my desktop labeled Proof and dropped the files inside. The next day I called Olivia. I think I hit the bottom of something, I told her. Good, she said softly. From there you can see everything above you. I don't even feel angry anymore. That's not numbness, that's clarity. What will you do? I'll keep records. Everything. No more arguing, no more crying, just data. She was quiet for a moment. That's a start, she said. But don't build a life out of evidence alone. Build a story. You should share it one day. I don't know who would want to hear it. Other women who stayed too long, she said. There's a forum in San Diego next month. Anonymous speakers. I think you should go. I promised to think about it. 2 days later, Marcus emailed a summary of what he'd found. Ryan's startup had secured a private investor loan 6 months earlier using my name as co-signer. The total was high enough to trigger regulatory oversight. If I hadn't caught it, any default would have tied back to me. Marcus's closing line was simple. You did the right thing sending this now. I stared at the message until the words blurred, then I printed it and placed it in the growing box on the shelf. At work, the fallout moved fast. Carla was suspended pending investigation. The IT department scrubbed every record. Eleanor called me late that evening. I'm sorry this happened under my watch, she said. You handled it with more grace than most. Grace isn't the word I'd use, I said. What word would you use? Practice, I said. She paused, then nodded. Take some time. We'll sort things here. When I hung up, I felt the smallest trace of satisfaction, not because Carla had been caught, but because the pattern was finally visible. Betrayal had a rhythm, and I could predict the beat. Ryan called again that night. He sounded different, nervous, but pretending confidence. I heard from Marcus, I said before he could start. He's seen the documents. There was a silence on the line, then a sharp exhale. You went to a lawyer. I went to someone who knows the law. You're overreacting, he said. This is business. Everyone uses spouse signatures to smooth things along. Without asking, he laughed brittle. You always have to make things difficult. I have to make them true, I said. He cursed softly. You'll regret making this ugly. Maybe, I said, but I won't regret stopping it. When the call ended, I stared at the phone until the screen dimmed. I thought about all the times he had said I'd regret leaving. Maybe this was what he meant, that regret would come not as heartbreak, but as exhaustion. I opened the balcony door and let the cold air wash the smell of him out of the room. The next week, I took Olivia's suggestion. I flew to San Diego for the forum booked under a shortened version of my name. The hotel ballroom smelled of coffee and floral carpet cleaner. The first speaker talked about rebuilding after layoffs, the second about surviving financial abuse. When it was my turn, I walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and told a room full of strangers about the cost of silence. I did not say names or cities or companies. I just told the truth in small sentences. Afterward, a woman in the audience came up to me and said, "You sounded calm. How did you get there?" I stopped reacting, I said, and I started recording. That night back in my room, I sat by the window overlooking the city and watched planes rise toward the dark. For the first time in years, I felt distance that didn't ache. When betrayal becomes familiar, silence stops being weakness. It becomes strategy. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 4. Proof Not Rage. By early 2023, winter had begun to melt into a gray Seattle spring, the kind where every morning smelled like rain that never quite stopped. I had just finished a meeting with Eleanor when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost let it ring out, but something in me already knew. Hey, Ryan's voice came through soft practiced. I'm back in town for a few days. Thought maybe we could talk, for Sophie's sake. I looked out at the puddles streaking across the parking lot. About what exactly? About fixing things. I made mistakes, I know that. But we were good once. We can be again. I could hear the smile he was wearing, the same one that had closed investors and opened doors. You should send me an email if it's about Sophie, I said. Elena, don't be like that, he said quickly. Let's meet. Coffee 10 minutes. I just want to explain myself. The part of me that used to tremble at the sound of his voice was gone. I agreed to meet, not out of nostalgia, but because I wanted to look him in the eye when he realized he had finally lost control of the story. We met at a small coffee shop tucked behind an art gallery downtown. I arrived first, chose a table by the window. He walked in wearing a coat that looked more expensive than he could afford. His hair was shorter, but the same self-assured grin had survived. He sat down, tried to find the rhythm of our old conversations. "You look good," he said. "I look busy," I said. "Let's not pretend this is social." He nodded slowly, his hands tightening around the paper cup. "I know what I did was wrong. I panicked. The loan thing, the signatures. I just wanted to save the company. Everything was crashing and I didn't want to scare you." "You didn't scare me, Ryan. You lied to me." His jaw flexed. "You've always painted me as some kind of villain. I was trying to fix something. By using my name to secure money you weren't entitled to." He looked down, then back up with that same pleading expression he used when caught but not yet cornered. "You think I wanted it to happen like this? I didn't mean to hurt you." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "You didn't hurt me, Ryan. You exposed yourself. There's a difference. And for the record, what you did isn't regret. It's fraud." His eyes flickered surprise mixing with frustration. "You always need to make it sound dramatic." "No," I said. "I just call things what they are. You said I'd regret walking away. You were right, but not how you meant. I regret not walking away sooner." He exhaled sharply, the charm cracking. "You've changed." "I had to. Someone had to grow up." I stood, left money for my coffee, and walked toward the door. Behind me, he said quieter, "I still love you." I paused just long enough to look back. "You love ownership, not partnership." That evening, I met with Marcus in his office. He was waiting with a neat folder and 2 stamped envelopes. "These are notarized copies of the documents you gave me," he said. "I've sent duplicates to the Texas State Securities Board and the Washington Attorney General's office. Identity theft and forgery fall under both jurisdictions since the contracts cross state lines. You've done everything correctly." I nodded, the relief quiet rather than triumphant. "What happens now?" "They'll open an inquiry. He'll receive a formal notice within weeks. Don't communicate with him until it's resolved. Any contact should go through me." When I left his office, the sky was streaked with pink and ash. For the first time in years, I felt the kind of calm that comes after a long storm rather than before one. A month later, Eleanor called me back to her office. She was smiling this time. "Internal audit is complete," she said. "The board has reviewed Carla's case. She falsified data in at least 3 reports. She's been terminated. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them." Eleanor handed me a new contract. "I want you to lead our new Integrity Projects division. You've handled yourself with more grace and precision than anyone here. We need that kind of steadiness." "Integrity Projects?" I asked, scanning the title. "Exactly what it sounds like. Oversight, compliance, mentorship. Turning what happened into something that keeps us clean." I signed. For once, a signature felt like control, not risk. At home, I began clearing the clutter I had ignored for years. That was when Mason appeared again. He was an old college friend who had become an architect, soft-spoken and kind in the way that comes from knowing his own boundaries. He offered to help me redesign the apartment. "It's too dark in here," he said, walking through the living room. "You need space that breathes." "Space that doesn't hold ghosts," I said. He smiled. "Exactly." We spent weekends pulling up carpet, repainting walls, rearranging furniture. Sophie helped choose colors, insisting her room stay yellow because it felt like sunshine. Mason taught her how to use a measuring tape, and she followed him around like an apprentice. When he left one evening, he paused at the door. "It's good to see you building again," he said. "It's easier when the foundation finally holds." I said. By summer, news about Ryan's company began trickling through industry channels. Investors were quietly withdrawing. The official statement used the phrase restructuring, but I knew what that meant. Then in August, Marcus called. "The Securities Board has issued a notice of inquiry," he said. "Ryan's counsel has been contacted. They'll begin interviews next month." "Does he know I was the complainant?" "Not officially," Marcus said. but he will soon. A week later, an envelope arrived at my apartment, no return address but his handwriting on the front. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a letter written in his uneven scrawl. He talked about sleepless nights, how he missed Sophie, how he wanted forgiveness. He said he still believed we could be a family again, that love like ours didn't just end. 2 days later, another envelope came, this one from Marcus. It contained a copy of the formal government notice. Legal language filled the page, sterile and certain. The first line read that the Texas State Securities Board had opened an investigation into potential forgery and identity misuse related to his startup's funding activities. I set the two letters side by side on the table, his words begging for grace beside the law demanding truth. The contrast was almost poetic. Sophie came into the room holding a drawing she had made at school. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to the envelopes. "Just papers," I said. "One about mistakes, one about consequences." She nodded as if that made perfect sense and went back to her crayons. That evening, I took both letters to my desk. I slid his into a drawer I rarely opened and pinned the official notice to the corkboard above my workspace. Proof, not rage. That had become my quiet creed. In October, Mason stopped by again with a small potted plant. "For your window," he said. "Every room needs something alive." "Do you always bring plants to your clients?" "Only the ones who forget they deserve light." I laughed and placed it on the sill. Outside, the city lights flickered through the fog. Inside, the apartment finally felt mine. A few days later, I received an email from Eleanor. The company was expanding the integrity division, and she wanted me to lead a presentation for new hires about ethical decision-making. I reread the message twice. It felt like the kind of full circle that rarely happens in real life. That night, I poured tea and sat by the window, the plant beside me. Sophie's laughter drifting from her room. My phone buzzed once more. Ryan again. I let it ring. I had nothing left to say. Later, as I prepared to sleep, I noticed the two envelopes still on the desk. I held them for a moment, the weight uneven between them, and whispered to the quiet room. 2 letters arrived the same day. One begged for forgiveness. One demanded accountability. I placed the government notice back on the board and the apology letter into the drawer. Guess which one I answered? If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 5. I didn't leave to hurt him. I left to find me. A year later, I stood behind a podium in a sunlit ballroom in San Diego, facing a crowd of women whose faces carried the same mix of exhaustion and hope I had once worn. The sign behind me read, "Women in Leadership Conference 2025. My session was titled, "The Cost of Staying Too Long." My palms were dry, not trembling, and my voice was steadier than I expected when I began to speak. I told them about the years I mistook endurance for devotion, how I measured loyalty by how much I could tolerate. I told them that sometimes survival does not look like fighting, but like walking away quietly and rebuilding from the ashes. As I spoke, I saw women nodding, some blinking back tears, some taking notes as if they were recording permission. I didn't mention Ryan by name or Bionex or any of the cities that had framed the years between falling in love and finding myself again. I just said that silence is not weakness when it carries truth inside it. I said that courage does not always sound like shouting. Sometimes it is a soft no whispered to the wrong person at the right time. When I finished, the applause rose like a wave, long and steady. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the sound wash through me. When I opened them, I saw Mason near the back of the room, standing with his hands in his pockets, smiling in quiet recognition. He didn't come forward, didn't make a gesture, just nodded once. It felt like a punctuation mark, not a beginning. Later at the small reception after the talk, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 28, her eyes bright but rimmed with the kind of fatigue I knew too well. "How did you know when to leave?" she asked. "When I stopped being afraid of peace," I said. "I used to think loneliness was the worst thing. Then I learned that being with the wrong person is a slower kind of dying." She exhaled as if releasing something heavy. "Thank you," she said. That night, I walked along the San Diego waterfront alone. The air smelled of salt and citrus from the stalls nearby. My reflection followed me across the glass of the bay, older, lighter, unburdened. I thought about how long it had taken to feel whole without needing anyone's permission. Meanwhile, in Austin, the final ruling had come through. Ryan's startup had dissolved quietly after the securities board findings were made public. The fine was large enough to wipe out whatever savings he had left. He had filed for bankruptcy in January. I found out through Marcus, who sent a short message saying the case was closed, and I was officially cleared of any liability. There were no courtrooms, no shouting, no gloating headlines. Karma didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived in paperwork. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Some victories don't need witnesses. Sophie and I returned to Seattle a few weeks later. The city felt softer in spring, full of light that slipped between clouds without asking. She was 10 now, curious and stubborn with Ryan's chin, but my eyes. One Saturday morning, she asked if we could visit Grandma Linda's flower shop. The bell above the door still chimed the same way it had when I was a child. The air smelled of soil and lilies. My mother looked up from arranging a bouquet, her hands steady and gentle. "Well, if it isn't my favorite girls," she said. "What are we shopping for today?" Sophie ran to the back to look at the roses. I scanned the display until my eyes landed on a cluster of white tulips, their petals smooth and simple. They were the same kind Ryan had brought me the night he proposed, his hands shaking as he told me we were unstoppable together. I remembered how I had pressed those flowers in a book to preserve the moment. I never realized some moments weren't meant to be preserved. I picked up a bundle and carried it to the counter. "Those are beautiful," my mother said. "Special occasion." "Just a new habit," I said. "Buying flowers for myself." She smiled in that knowing way mothers do. "That's the best kind." Outside, Sophie tugged at my sleeve. "Can I hold them?" "Of course," I said, handing her the bouquet. "Be careful, they're delicate." She examined them closely. "They look strong to me." I looked at her and smiled. "Maybe they are." We walked home along the quiet street, her small hand clutching the stems, the petals catching bits of sunlight. At the corner, she stopped and tilted her face up. "Mom, do you ever think about Dad?" "Sometimes," I said honestly, "but not the way I used to." "Do you hate him?" I shook my head. "No. Hating someone means they still take space inside you. I'd rather keep that space for better things." She nodded as if she understood and started walking again. That evening, after she went to bed, I placed the tulips in a glass vase by the window. Their reflection shimmered against the darkened glass, white and steady. I sat down and opened my journal, the one Olivia had given me years ago when everything still hurt. I flipped to a blank page and wrote without pausing. "He said I'd regret letting him go. He was right, but not in the way he imagined. I regretted not leaving sooner. I don't need his apology. My life is the proof." I closed the book and looked at the vase, at the quiet beauty of something that grew simply because it could. Outside, the city hummed ordinary and alive. I thought of all the women I had met in that conference room, of the girl who asked how I knew when to leave, of every version of myself who stayed too long waiting for permission to begin again. Sometimes the real revenge is not rage or exposure or a courtroom victory. It is learning to live so fully that the person who tried to break you becomes irrelevant to the story that follows. I turned off the light, leaving only the glow from the street lamp outside. The tulips glowed faintly, like quiet witnesses to the life I had rebuilt. Sometimes revenge doesn't need noise. It only needs you to live well enough, honestly enough, that the truth speaks for itself. And in that silence, you finally hear yourself again.